You know, African traditions allow you to marry as long as you can provide for your family. You can have multiple wives, and I think that was understood by mom.
Honolulu is not Africa.
But she's African tradition.
And Honolulu is not Africa, and you have to abide by American standards in Honolulu, and that's not Africa. And so they were never married. But Barack was born a bastard, and he still is. He's a trashy bastard is what he is.
In your opinion, he's a trashy bastard. We got Urban League Director Mel Larson. He got a question for you. Reverend James Mannings on the phone line. Good.
Dr. Manning, how are you, sir?
Just fine. How are you?
I'm just great. Listen, my question is I'm listening to the things that you're sharing, and as a pastor, and as a man of God, and as a man who holds the book holy, and as an ex-convict yourself, first of all, judging someone else and maligning individuals, then that's not biblical. Can you share with us where that's biblical, the things that you're doing and the things that you're saying about Obama, about his mom, about his dad? Where is that biblical, sir?
First of all, I think that there has been a gross misinterpretation of the Matthew 7:1 verse where it says, "Judge ye not, for the judgment that you judge shall be measured unto you again." People have taken that verse to say that you should never judge, which is Jesus never meant that, and it's absolutely impossible for anybody to go through a day or an hour without making a judgment. What it simply says is that, listen, if you go around judging people, they're going to go around judging you. Now, I've called Barack a trashy bastard, and people have called me Uncle Tom, Uncle Ruckus, and Aunt Jemima. So the same judgment I'm handing out is coming back to me. That's all Jesus meant by that.
Well,
he didn't tell us to think that somehow or another that we can actually live in this world without making judgments. We all make them every day. Y'all made a judgment to call me. So that's a gross misinterpretation of the Bible.
Okay, sir, I did not talk about that specific verse specifically, but I'm well aware of that. But you haven't answered my question. With you being an ex-con,
right? With
you being a pastor and leading people,
okay,
where do you get off from making yourself an appointed judge to call other people trash, etc.? I'm waiting on you to share that with us.
Well, first of all, I can tell you, I get documented information that he is trash. I mean, if there are records, if there's information that demonstrates that a person's an ex-convict, well, they can do what they want to do with their life afterwards, but they were at one point that time, and I have that documentation, so that's where I get it from, and that's why I'm speaking it. The other thing, as a pastor, I have the spiritual duty and the responsibility as a community leader that if I see a danger for the community, for the people at large, it is my fiduciary duty to tell people that, listen, this person is dangerous for you. This person's not good for you. This person represents evil, and you'd better stay away from them. And so that's what I'm doing with Barack and with the black nation and America in general.
Reverend Mannings, you have called Creflo Dollar a pimp. You called Reverend Price a snake in the grass. You have called Joyce Myers. Is there any T.D. Jakes? Is there any mega pastors, any pastors out here that you do admire that's living today, that's African American?
Well, I gave you a name of some leaders that I thought were credible a few moments ago.
Right.
But I will say this: these people that you've just called, they are hustling poor people like you won't believe to stop. Someone needs to be able to stand up and defend these poor innocent people who don't understand really how the Bible verses are being twisted, how their monies are being taken from them, how they're being promised everything and given nothing. And so I'm on the battlefield for that as well. I feel that we have, as a people, black people in general, have been led hook, line, and sinker down a path of utter destruction. I don't know what part of Michigan you're in, but if you're anywhere near Detroit, that city is littered and has been since the advent of Coleman Young as its mayor with crime. For many years, it was the crime capital of the world till Washington, D.C. took it away, and then New Orleans took it away from Washington, D.C., but the three cities are still fighting. Well, Philadelphia is now trying to get in the mix as well, and this is all under black leadership. This is all fall under the black ideology of black civil rights, black prosperity, which is but degrade our communities. Before all of this took place, before we had these pimps in the pulpit like Jakes and Dollar and all these others, when there were churches in that area, people were doing a whole lot better. We're in grave trouble, and I'm here to announce it and tell people and warn people of where we are at present.
James,
Pastor Manning, I had listened to a sermon that you gave. I'm not exactly sure the date of it, but you mentioned in there that a black leader is really not credible unless they've been imprisoned or they've been jailed. Can you explain that some?
Yeah, I can, and that was a bit of hyperbole by that. I mean, that was a bit of an exaggerated example of a truth that can be applied, but does not necessarily have to be across the board applied to everyone's life. I was simply stating that, I don't know if you're black, I suppose you are, but being black in America, you are always subject to arrest. And there's this thing called driving while black. Policemen tend to look at black people, and automatically you're subject to going to jail in our street right now, with a shirt and tie on, and end up in jail simply because I look like somebody who did something. That doesn't happen with other people. The other item is that most black leaders who've helped black people to some degree or have stood up for them or tried to point the way in some as best they understood it, albeit right or wrong, have gone to jail. And Malcolm went to jail, I stated. Dr. King went to jail. Even Jesus went to jail. And a whole lot of the disciples went to jail. But that was an exaggerated statement. It doesn't have to hold true that every black leader has to go to jail.
Pastor Manning, I have to ask you this question, sir. Are you listening to yourself?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, your whole premise has been don't let black people in the White House, except the White House has never had black people in it, yet you have cited driving while black. You have cited if I walk out here right. So all of these things, white people have always been in control of this country. You talked about Detroit. You talked about New Orleans. You talked about other places that was. So what then, sir, is your point? If this country has always been run by white people, and we see how corrupt and how foul things are, we see that we are in a war, that your president lied to everybody about his weapons of mass destruction, et cetera. So now, and then plus,
and yours is
so with that status, sir, you have a man in the White House that was a cheerleader of all things. And he's running around advocating war, trying to pretend to be tough and all of that. And you are pom-poms, and you trying to run the country. But yet you say that the country is not ready for a black president, sir.
Well,
I don't understand your point.
Let me try to make that clear if I possibly can.
Yes.
It's a bit of an intricate answer, and it requires more thought than people generally give to conversations like this or to issues regarding black people in general. And so therefore it is not always readily perceived. I mean, there are some knee-jerk responses that people can give, some yes and no answers that are always on the tip of people's cerebrum. They can always say yes or no to that, but really haven't thought very deeply about the issue. What I'm trying to express is this, is that if even with Barack's candidacy now, he has given black people a false hope. The black people are thinking that the dire straits that they're in right now, which has nothing to do with white man or black man, but has everything to do with God, he is giving people the false hope that somehow or another his candidacy is going to change the conditions of the black or white people in control of America. Listen, they put Nelson Mandela in charge of South Africa as the president, didn't change a thing, only made it worse. And so simply by putting a black person in office does not uplift black people, and they're under this false assumption that it's going to happen. See, what's wrong with black people is not a white man's problem. White folk aren't holding us down. Yeah, of course they do have a certain amount of power, but that's because we don't understand who we are. When we began to realize that what we have is a God problem. For instance, if you look at the continent of Africa, the droughts that take place there, the famine, the runaway diseases, and the failure to develop economically, all of that was persistent before the white man ever colonized, ever came there. So our problem is a God problem. We've got a problem with with God. And we need to take our problem to the Lord. We need to do what the Second Chronicle says. We need to kneel and pray and ask God to help us. And when God is with us, no man can be against us. And the other item is that the social problems of a people in terms of the unity and change that Barack is talking about has never in the history of the world been solved through politics. It's always solved through people and through a religious vehicle and never through a political vehicle. A political vehicle has always been about money and about power and about separation of those who don't have it and those who do have it. And Barack is no different from that. And so for black people to be jumping up and down thinking for all the